Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the fifth episode of Round the Table with KRN. Today's episode is about powering a green and sustainable future for Pakistan. As we all know, carbon-based fuels are responsible for around 2/3 of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. In addition to climate change, fossil fuels also produce pollutants for the air, something that has hit us very close to home in Lahore and the rest of Punjab, where we see that 80% of the pollutants are coming from fossil fuels, with 43% being contributed from the transport industry, 25% from industry in general, and 12% from the power generation sector. Energy decarbonization is pivotal to maintaining temperatures in the world. If we need to stay below the 2 degrees Celsius threshold of rising temperature, overall by 2050, renewables need to provide 65% of the world's primary energy supply. Unfortunately, as a world, we are at 30% right now. To discuss this very poignant and important topic of decarbonization and green investments, I have with us today two experts, one from the investment side and one from the industry side, to give us an introduction to how green investments look like in Pakistan and what can be done to have more green energy and more renewable energy in Pakistan. On my left is Mr. Waqas Khatri, who is a forward-looking, climate-savvy director at Ittehad Chemicals. Ittehad Chemicals is trying to use renewable energy for power generation, and he'll be sharing his experience with the plant that they're putting on, and also his experience from the industry. Thank you so much, Waqas, for being with us today.
Having me.
On my right is Mr. Saqib Tariq, who looks at strategic equity and green investments at Karandaaz, Pakistan, and of course has lots of experience in green investments, research, valuation, and modeling. Thank you so much, Saqib, for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So before we really go into the investment that Karandaaz has with Ittehad Chemicals, I'd like to start with the macro picture. And I'd like to understand from the both of you, what does the status quo look like?
I can speak for the industry. Maybe Saqib can speak for the country overall. But I think, it's a start. There's been some decent policies. The feasibilities are good. Industry's taking the initiative. Solar, wind, it's all happening. We even recently have some captive wind turbines. So it's a start. Biomass is it's at its early stages, has a lot of potential, has challenges, of course. But I think industry is going to champion this. The costs are supportive. The cost structure is supportive to the overall business. And I think it's a plus point too. In the future, customers are going to be asking for green manufacturing, right? So it's the only way to go.
That's extremely positive to hear because generally when we sit here and we talk to industry, we see a lot of, that a lot more incentives need to be given. So whenever I've talked to industry about other sort of private sector initiatives, they're like, we need incentives, we need more better regulation, we need more money. So I'm really, really glad to hear that. So essentially, I think with green...
It goes both ways, right? The crisis is so bad in Pakistan that creates enough incentive to do the investments. So let's see where it goes.
Well, that's very interesting to hear. Saqib, are you going to give us a gloom and doom, or are you going to be as positive as
I'll try to be as realistic as possible, right? So the way I'll start is Pakistan has consistently ranked amongst the top 10 most vulnerable countries in the world, which are going to be impacted by climate change. Now, keeping that in view or keeping that perspective, if you talk about the mobilization of capital that needs to have or that's need to be taking place, unfortunately, we are very far behind. And the argument that is often presented is that Pakistan only contributes 1% of the, or actually less than 1% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, whereas we are taking a big brunt of the outcome or the issues that we are going to face because of that. And it's not driven because of us. But that is one side, and that is one argument to be made. But the other side is like, okay, so we are stuck in this challenge, we are stuck in this problem. How do we try to come out of this challenge? Now, there are two sides to this. That there's the foreign investments, that is one side, so I'll be talking about that, and as well as the local investments. So on the foreign investment sides, a lot of multilaterals, they have initiated a lot of programs, G2G as well, and then recently we have seen a few positive developments over the last couple of years with a couple of GCF proposals being approved which are going to catalyze the further investments in the green space within Pakistan. Now, in contrast to that, if you take a look at the local space or the local industry, without a few notable names, you do not see the majority of the industry players understanding the gravity of mobilizing capital towards these green investments. So there's a lack of understanding as well as challenge over there, and there's two sides that I would further add. That policy side, for instance, State Bank had a 6% subsidized lending rate. So now, since that has been withdrawn, we have seen that the industry has taken a backseat because they had cheaper financing available. But at the same time, as Waqas was mentioning, that the cost cases over there, that the cost of energy is so high that now even on a commercial borrowing basis, there is a business case to be made for renewable energy or even captive power plants for various industry players.
I'll add one thing to that. I've seen this 3 times in my very short career in 15 years. Every time crude oil goes up, everyone starts looking at alternatives. As soon as it crashes, no one cares about alternatives, right? So, and this has happened 3 times in the last 15 years. Right now, it's been about 3 years, 4 years maybe, we've had consistently high crude oil prices. So that's supportive, right? Now, with the grid and the pipeline gas being so expensive in Pakistan, that just creates more incentive to look at alternatives. I just hope crude oil doesn't crash. Right?
So it's not very altruistic. It's essentially a business case. So I think a lot of the times when we talk about...
But there's a difference. There's a difference this time, right? Can't speak for the last 50 years, but in the last 15 years, there wasn't much regulation around going towards a more sustainable future. But now Europe's taken a step, right? They're setting up the carbon tax structure. So it's a start. And this is something I hope the activity sustains, and it means a better future, I think.
Cheers to better futures. Moving on to the Karandaaz investment now. So I think maybe I'll start with you, Waqas. So we know that there's an investment that Karandaaz has made in Ittehad Chemicals, specifically for renewable energy. So could you walk us through what are the aims and objectives, mission of this investment? And, I know that you guys have chosen biomass. Could you also talk about why you chose biomass as the primary source of renewable energy power for Ittehad?
So us as a company and generally the chemical industry as a whole is very capital intensive or energy intensive as well as capital intensive. We've been running on a gas power plant for the last 25 years or so, and captive obviously because grid's been expensive for the last 2+ decades. Whereas most of our competition is on coal. So now they obviously have an advantage on cost. So it's been almost more than 10 years we've been planning a coal power plant too. In fact, like 6-7 years back, we even did some designing on that. But every year the board would just say no on the coal. Like we would literally... Every year we would do all the preparation, and then when the board meeting would come, it would get shot down. And the background is that there's 3 generations on our board, and the youngest generation was just not owning up to it because this is a 20-year decision, right? Whatever we do today, we have to operate it for at least 20 years. So we were lucky the elder generation listened to us, and they kept pushing the decision down the line. And we looked at solar. It's not a holistic solution for us. We need thermal. We have a thermal load on our plant. We use significant power 24/7, 365. And wind wasn't an option in Punjab. So then we started. Biomass was something that was there, but what's the problem in Pakistan is there's not enough data on the supply chain. And that's really kept a lot of industry from jumping in. I know a lot of entrepreneurs that want to go this side, but they just don't have the data. So we took it upon ourselves to do all 3-year study on the supply chain to make our board comfortable that this is something we can deal with for the next 20 years. And ultimately, we were successful in convincing the board, and and it also sort of molded our overall vision where, as a chemical company, we're now moving towards sustainable chemicals. A lot of the multinational chemical companies from Germany, from Japan are moving this way too. So I think it makes sense for us to set up the biomass supply chain for ourselves and then, pave a new road for us ahead.
Okay, and just in terms of a very small technical question, what's the difference between biomass and biogas?
Biomass is plant material. Biogas is methane that can be recovered from plant material or manure,
Okay.
right? So biogas is a sort of a downstream derivative. You can
Okay,
think
and
of
so
it.
with the biomass, you have, I think there are some byproducts also that also add to the carbon footprint reduction and also some tradable carbon credits in the future.
Well, we looked at carbon credits. We looked at getting carbon credits for this, and we could have. Because we're going the sustainable chemicals route, we want to account for the reduction on our own books.
Okay.
So after meeting a bunch of consultants, we decided, I mean, there are people who've done this, but we obviously would never go that way. This concept of double counting, right? If we're counting the reduction on our accounts, then we can't sell the credit to someone
Sure.
else. So we decided against the credits because of that.
Yeah, but there is a significant.
Yeah, I mean, there's a
yeah.
reduction. I mean, what's from coming under the ground, and now we're just bringing it in from farms, right? It's going to be 100 to 150 trucks a day. Now, is that coming from under the ground, or is it from the surface that's been captured from there? So it makes a big difference, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean that's a very important dimension, and I like the ethics of not double counting. Again, this is a new one for us because usually when we speak to industry, it's a bit problematic. So Saqib, now I understand how it made sense for them. For Ittehad Chemicals, why did this investment make sense for Karandaaz? What is the investment size like, and what is compelling about this particular investment?
So the investment or the partnership, actually, I wouldn't call it investment because when we find the like-minded partners, we usually tend to have a longer-term relationship, and I believe that is going to be the case with Waqas Saab and his team. So this investment was particularly compelling for Karandaaz because first it resonated with us because Karandaaz has been a pioneer in promoting green investments within the Pakistani space. Now, if you take a look at the biomass power plant, it offers significant advantages compared to other renewable sources as well. For instance, one of the criteria that we looked at when we were assessing this investment opportunity was we understood that this is going to help create a market. It has a market development angle to it. As Waqas was mentioning, the biomass supply chain is not formalized, but if there's a significant demand for that is created through setting up of these similar power plants, then what it does, it sorts of formalizes the supply chain. And then you have to realize that this formalization of supply chain would start from maybe far off villages as well. So there's a job development angle, job creation angle that we noticed through this investment. So that was one of the key things that because of Karandaaz as a double bottom line a finance provider, we try to look at these things. Okay, there's going to be that has a strong market development angle and job creation. Another thing that sort of came up as later was that it is also going to partially address the air quality issue that we are right now seeing in Lahore. So the smog levels in Lahore are unprecedented. A lot of researches and studies are saying that it's because of the stubble burning that is happening across the border, and then the winds are carrying all of that over here. Now imagine if the same stubble burnings starts happening around Lahore, right? So that is going to just aggravate the situation. But if you have incentivized through purchase of these rice stock, these corn cobs, and all of these things, you've incentivized these farmers to collect them instead of burning them. You sort of helping reduce the overall situation. So from that perspective, it made a lot of sense. Of course, we noticed that we potentially have the opportunity to work with good partners, and it made business sense as well. For instance, as Waqas was mentioning, the cost of energy is so high that if you compare that with the biomass, it makes absolute business sense for a company like Ittehad, which is very energy intensive to switch to a more reliable source of energy and renewable source of energy, I'd say. So all of these things checked off, and for that reason, Karandaaz was onboarded with the whole idea of this investment with Ittehad.
Okay, and I mean, just talking generally about access to such investments for industry and access to credit for such, because what we do know is that yes, the costing makes sense, and yes, it's great for the environment, but there is a large initial investment. So, what is the local market looking like in terms of access to credit for industry for specifically greening or renewable energies? I'll ask the same question from you also, Waqas, but I'll start with you.
Sure. So I'm going to speak on a broader terms, and then Waqas can probably talk about the Ittehad perspective or the industry perspective. I see that in a lot of spaces, in, for instance, captive power plants, you would see that a lot of other financial institutions might be willing to take part in that. But then there are a lot of situations, for instance, if you're trying to have a new technology of maybe producing something like a biodiesel or something along those lines, which is not really the run of the mill in the country, you might see hesitation or reluctance from the broader industry players to provide financing with that. But this is where Karandaaz as an institution comes in, that we want to sort of de-risk that. Of course, we try to we have to take a commercial perspective in terms of development perspective, both that it is viable, and we want to demonstrate it to the market that, okay, this is something that can be done. And then once it has been demonstrated to the market, they can take it up and go ahead and do it for themselves. But in the broader space, I do see there is appetite, but mostly for the run-of-the-mill projects, for maybe companies that do not have a lot of assets on their book. For instance, what Karandaaz has done is that we have partnerships or these investment relationships with a lot of solar EPC players. And these solar EPC players, a lot of their payments from their clients, these are milestone based. And as a result of that, they have to first procure the solar panels and all of these things, which is often imported. And for that time period, when the import is taking place and the material is being brought over here, these solar EPCs would not have these assets on which they can potentially give charge to the banks, right? And as a result of that, the lending to them would be discouraged. So Karandaaz came in and found this problem, addressed this problem, that, okay, we are going to fill this gap so that once the EPC player has met a certain milestone, they would receive some sort of cash from the client, and then they can go ahead and then do the second leg of the project. So this gap, this is something that we have identified with a lot of EPC players and something that we have done already. Just to summarize, we see there is lack of industry participation in coming up with some of these innovative approaches to address these challenges. But generally, for the run-of-the-mill projects, there is appetite, and that is something that we have noticed.
You were talking about this subsidized line from SBP, that 6%. Could you tell us more about that?
So
was that instrumental in these run-of-the-mill investments that you're saying that there's appetite for? Because what we do see generally is that private sector credit in Pakistan is crowded out by public sector credit from banks. And so what we do see is that a lot less investment or credit lines go into the SMEs per se, and generally private sector itself. So, do you think that 6% subsidized line was the catalyst, or, I mean, how do you look at it?
If I take it from a industry perspective, I think industry players would be really happy that you have a subsidized line of financing.
And sorry, when we say industry, you're talking about the banking industry?
No, I'm talking about the potential industry players who are going to utilize this line. So let me just start with a recap. So State Bank had a refinance facility to promote solar and renewable energy, primarily towards the solar side. And it was at a 6% rate. And then, of course, some of the banks would add up their margin, but that was heavily subsidized. So a lot of businesses utilized those lines to avail financing for these renewable energy projects. But the challenge is that if you're going to have a change at a large scale, it cannot always be on a unsustainable basis of having a commercial line, right? A subsidized line by the regulator. So generally, the industry needed to move away from the subsidized line to a commercial line. And then, of course, there's a business sense why only industry players would delve into these sort of projects if there is a business case to be made. And and I'm a strong proponent for that, that unless there's a business case, industry would not move to it. So we do see that while that was a catalyst and sort of
Created a demonstration effect, right?
Yes, absolutely. That created a demonstration effect, but now that has taken up, and now the banks and some of the other players are also getting involved in this, and we are seeing that even at the revised interest rates, it makes business sense for companies to undertake such projects, and this is what they are doing right now.
Right. So I think, very interestingly, one of the things that the State Bank is also now doing is putting penalties on ADR ratios. So I think that is going to help crowd in some more private sector debt. Let's see how it happens, because right now you have
I think it's temporary now, right?
So I think the idea again is demonstration, because as the bank, as the central bank, their role in development finance has to be limited. They have to be regulate the monetary policy. But things like this, as Saqib was also mentioning, what they'll do is that they'll create this impetus, and when banks actually see that industry is viable and industry is a good investment to make, and those relationships will get built, over time more private sector credit will come from the banks. I mean, that's at least the hypothesis. Let's see how it kind of works. But in terms of that, I think it's enabling. And then there's a lot happening in terms of with climate change because of the floods. What had happened was that Pakistan was really badly affected, and so now there's an impetus on the government and also multilaterals and just generally investors to look at this aspect, and decarbonization being the first thing to do. There's lots to do, of course.
I'd like to comment on this. We talked about that 3%, 6% financing for solar. I think, look, from an industry perspective, for someone who's utilizing it immediately, it's great, right? But I think overall, even if you step back, it really sets the stage.
Expectations wise, right?
Well, no, I mean, the market has to develop, right? Now, I think something similar is required on the biomass side. I mean, Pakistan's an agricultural country. We have a lot of biomass, but not all of it is in a state where it can be easily transported to a place, right? Or to a processing facility. So it requires a lot of investment to build that supply chain. Yes, the consumption side is a whole another animal, right? Yeah. So, and it has to go hand in hand. Consumption's going to come up, but then the supply chain has to be, who's going to build that supply chain, right? It's not the consumption guys. Absolutely. Maybe the consumption guys will help with that, but there's a lot of financing required here. And that's where I think something similar would greatly help. I wouldn't say it's a subsidy and it's unsustainable after the subsidy, because the market is developing. Today, the biomass is worth, say, 10 rupees. Now, a subsidized loan today helps, but as the market develops, that same biomass is going to be worth 12. And later, they won't need that subsidized loan, right?
Absolutely.
But the supply chain and consumption has to go hand in hand. If it doesn't, we've seen what happened with the grid, and we've seen what happened with piped gas, right?
Absolutely. No, that's a very valid point. And I think as a catalyst, you're absolutely right that to trigger innovation or to trigger the development of a market, something along these lines has to be initiated, as we have seen time and time. And this is actually part of I would say this is a policy initiative that makes a market more conducive for rest of the players, and something that what potentially should be looked at, actually.
Which actually takes me to my question that I was thinking, and we're sort of already talking about it, is on the policy side or on the regulation side, specifically for renewables, specifically for green investments. What is being done and what more needs to be done? So, from a policy perspective, what does the government of Pakistan, what does the regulator, what do they need to do to kind of enable more investment? So, I mean, you've talked about some of it, right? So there has to be downstream work. So you can get the power plant, you can fund the power plant, like the construction, and then you can maybe even have buyers. But at the end of the day, if the supply chain to the power plant is going to be frayed or is difficult or it's harder to kind of organize, it'll become more expensive. So that's one thing that Waqas has already mentioned. Maybe we can speak to you about the policy, and then if there's anything else, Waqas.
One more thing I'll say is data.
Sorry?
Data is not available. Like we did a 3-year study to understand the supply chain. and the complexities of it, and it's still an unorganized sector. So, but it's huge, right? The scale is
It's everywhere.
it's everywhere. So now this data is in pockets. Like the agriculture departments have some of it. Provincial governments have it. Some multilaterals are collecting their own data. People like us have our own data. But all this data, if it comes together, I think decision making is much easier. I know I've personally spoken to other entrepreneurs that when they saw our study, they're like, all right, now we can seriously consider this, right? So
Start charging them for your data. But I get what you're saying. So, I mean,
Yeah.
the feasibility of not just biomass, but maybe other renewables also is not as obvious or is not as clear. And, just contextualizing it to Pakistan. Because I've seen feasibilities, at other country levels and, at the international level. But contextualized to Pakistan, I think the government can definitely, and even development institutions, I think, can play a big role in kind of putting that data together, doing how to, what are the feasibilities like, how much investment will yield what and what are the break-evens. I think that'll make it easier for industry, and I think that'll also make it easier for investors to sort of put their money in.
Absolutely.
So that's also an extremely important point. Yes, Saqib, what about you? What do you think?
So I'm going to purely think from a investment point of view. So from an investment point of view, the government policies can be made more lucrative in the sense that certain tax breaks could be given to maybe the banking industry as a whole, to the finance providers, to channel or fund more money. It doesn't have to be essentially maybe a tax break. You can for banks, they have a capital requirement that they have to put aside a certain amount of money depending on the level of the risk of the loan that they have extended. And this has happened in Germany as well, or maybe if I'm not mistaken, I think it's in the whole of European Union. But what they have done is they have reduced the capital requirement for the bank in terms of if they're lending for a green project, they have to set aside less money, right? And that sort of incentivizes those banks to push for more green investment. So these sort of policy level changes can definitely help. Moreover, I think one of the other key area is to mobilize capital through the capital markets. And when it's the capital markets, through these sukuks and green bonds and all of these things, right? But inherently, these green bonds and these green sukuks, because there's a big element of transparency, and you have to consistently report on that. And then you also have to develop in-house capabilities within that company or within that financial institution to be able to execute on those projects. There's certain costs associated with it, which you would not normally see with generally other sort of financing or the loans that are usually being lent out. This is not generally my idea. I remember I came across this article I don't recall the website, but I think the idea was floated by SECP that the government can potentially reduce the tax on the income or the market profit payment that is made to the investors who hold these green sukuks or green bonds. So I don't think that was taken up by any of the authorities, but that is one potential way that can essentially catalyze not just the financial institutions or these financial institutions or the banks that we have, but also the capital markets on the other side, so that they can come in and pool in the capital. Because the thing is very evident and very clear. Government resources are strained. They will not be able to help Pakistan achieve the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions that we have submitted for under the Paris Agreement, and we do not see they will be able to achieve it without the help of the private investors or the private markets.
Because the magna is so big, right? The issue,
Absolutely.
the magnitude of the matter, just like Waqas was saying earlier, is just so big that
Exactly.
it can't be the government alone.
So it has to come from the private sector as well, right? And these sort of initiatives should help mobilize capital from the private markets, from the private sector, towards these green investments, which Pakistan is very much in dire need of. So these things, in my opinion, should help from a policy side of view to catalyze more investment in the green space.
Essentially incentivization, but not looking at like breaks, but just generally seeing how incentives can be created within financial instruments and financial structures to get more private sector sort of involvement. I mean, and just looking at Pakistan, I think there hasn't been an orange bond yet, or has there been?
There hasn't been a green bond yet.
Yeah. So an environment bond, I think they're calling them orange bonds, right? Or are those gender bonds?
No, I think those
I get
are...
my colors wrong.
No, I think those are... actually, I would need to check up what an orange bond is. But for the green bonds, there hasn't been one. I mean, there has been one done by WAPDA, but that was a Euro bond, not a PKR-denominated green bond as of yet in Pakistan.
And I don't think it had any of those. So I know for a fact that a gender bond was done, and the gender bond's investment was on market. So it wasn't because it was a gender bond. So I think what you're saying in terms of the tax on the return from that bond, those will create that incentive for people to invest in priority sectors. So I mean, this is not just for the environment, for all priority sectors that we want to kind of funnel investment into. So those are important. And yes, of course, I think what we were talking about in terms of subsidies also, when a market is very new, the subsidy is required. And I think that's how some of what Karandaaz is also doing on the environment side is, with their Greenfin innovations, for example.
Yes.
So they get the startups, they kind of work with them either by grant or subsidized lending. And then when they're investable, they either go to banks or they either come to our serious bankers in the credit investment team, right?
Actually, that's a very good point that you made. And I think I'm going to take a couple of more minutes to talk about this because this is something that I'm really passionate about, right? So Karandaaz has actually been a pioneer in the green investment space. I think our green investment team has been here for more than 4 years. We were actually one of the first in the country to actually create a green team with a dedicated focus on green investment.
And they're not aliens, right? They're just
no. Just just working. So it's a cross-cutting theme through all of our different instruments that we have. For instance, private credit, private equity. We also do the hybrid instruments as well. So the theme is cross-cutting, and over the 4.5 years, we have mobilized over 10 billion rupees in green investments. Of course, it has been levered by, there's a leverage element to it through the private capital that we have sourced in. And we have enabled installation of over 20 megawatts of clean energy projects. And cumulatively, we've modeled it that it is going to help reduce around 300,000 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions from Pakistan. And renewable energy has been one of the key areas that we've worked on. But not just that, a lot of times when you're talking about green investments, people only talk about the renewable energy side, but there's a key element that is often neglected is the energy efficiency space. So in the energy efficiency space, we actually partnered with one of the efficient energy transformer manufacturer.
Right? Yeah.
Yes. Through their subsidiary, we have financed them for various different projects. So energy efficiency is another key area that we have been focused on. And in the future, we are seeing a lot of appetite from different market players as well who are transitioning to sustainable practices. And this is something that we have seen. And I believe we can talk more about why this change is coming and what's driving that. But generally, as a part of the investment team and looking after green investments, I'm really passionate about these things. So
another podcast, perhaps.
Yes.
So, Waqas, in terms of just talking about the biogas plant itself and biomass plant itself, you were saying that there's a lot of data collection and a lot of feasibility work that was done by your company in its own self, right? So on the design and the technical side, are you also then making sure that all of the other advancements such as, energy efficient transformers, energy efficient transmission, all of those things, are also being used specifically at the plant and then also generally across other other aspects of the work that Ittehad is doing? Because I do understand that of course you make chemicals and you need your power for the machines, but you're also running the entire industry. You have offices, things like that. Are you guys looking at doing that, and how what is the market like for that? Because we keep hearing that things are imported, milti nahi hai, so is there anything that you are also looking at in terms of that? And I'm sorry if this is a question.
No, I mean, my simple answer would be energy is expensive in Pakistan. So anything that saves energy saves money. So I think it's most companies are doing this quietly without making much noise. We're in a commodity space. We make commodities. It's a market price. It's all about controlling your cost. So, I mean, every year we're doing capex, and a lot of it is around
Energy
efficiencies, right? I would add more to beyond just the energy, though. Like, I mean, what is crude oil used for? Crude oil is used for, yes, making energy, but significant part of it is used for making chemicals. And those chemicals are now, it's starting in the world, but companies are looking at making those same chemicals with biomass. So I think that should be something that can be looked at maybe, and we'll discuss with Karandaaz how can this be structured, that it's not just the energy space, right?
What's going into
the
your
world
value
runs
chain,
on chemicals.
yeah.
Everything you
course.
touch and feel there's some chemical in it, and if you can make those chemicals from a sustainable feedstock, it changes the game.
Yeah,
Right.
especially for a country like Pakistan, right, where you have all that feedstock. You have
We
all
do
the-
have significant feedstock,
Yeah.
yes, and there is potential to that.
Talking about industry and talking about, bringing in efficiency, I think one of the issues that we've seen, not so much in Pakistan maybe because the consumer is not that is not that aware maybe on green products and green value chains, and greening. But something that we've seen, in the other parts of the world is the concept of greenwashing, where you're essentially saying that you're using efficient methods, you're using efficient energy, but it's really not being done. Is there something that you see in the industry happening in Pakistan or otherwise which would be a good example of greenwashing, and how can we kind of prevent that? Because the worst thing is that right at the start, when we're really trying to get investment into into the green industry or into renewables, you have large scale cases of greenwashing when then nobody is then interested, and it just completely does away with investor confidence and public confidence in those technologies. So Saqib, do you have anything to sort of contribute to that?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting and valid point, because this is something that we have seen mostly on the global scale, that a lot of companies have been involved in the idea of greenwashing, where they are claiming to do environmentally friendly operations, or they're saying that the way they are doing business is environmentally friendly. But if you take a deeper look, you often see challenges in that. So one of the things is that you need to, from the very onset, you need to have a defined list of parameters and then periodic reporting, which is often very transparent and has to be audited by a third party who can verify the claim that you're making. And these sort of things would help deal with this challenge or deal with this claim that anyone is trying to do greenwashing. Now, in Pakistan, I do not think that has been the case, fortunately, because I think partially because the activists groups in Pakistan are not very much in the motion right now, which would pressurize any of these companies to do any sort of greenwashing. Not that I think anyone would be interested in doing it, because eventually you're going to get caught. But the thing is,
Eventually.
yes, but the thing that we are seeing right now, for a very valid reason, is that a lot of industries and a lot of companies within Pakistan are genuinely adopting sustainable practices. And I'll tell you why. A lot of these companies are integrated in the global supply chains, right? And due to the virtue of that, now any global buyer, for instance, I'll take textiles as an example. So you have Zara, H&M, Levi's, and all of these companies, these are procuring from Pakistan. They have Pakistani textile companies are providing them a service. Now, these big companies at a large scale, they are also looking to, or many of them have actually started reporting on Scope 3 emissions. Now, Scope 3 emissions are the emissions which are in the part of their supply chain or value chain, which is either upstream or downstream. Now, as a result of that, these textile manufacturers that are located within Pakistan, they now actually have to report their emissions to these buyers as well. And for continued business, they will need to do it. So as a result of that, we see that there is a push from the buyers or from these institutions which have integrated the Pakistani industry globally to adopt more sustainable practices. And a lot of these companies have actually done genuine introspection and have actually taken a look into these approaches which they can take to reduce their carbon footprint, have a better sustainable practices in place, increase their energy efficiency, and they have done energy audits for themselves as well. So all of these things, and I think this is very critical for businesses that have not already realized this thing, because if you are looking to export right now or even in the future and to be able to continue to do that, you would need to adopt to these best practices. And this is one of these opportunities for the businesses within Pakistan to adopt these practices, which would essentially put them in a better position to against some of their competitors elsewhere. So I think it's a very valid thing. While greenwashing is concerned, we have not seen that in Pakistan, and a lot of industry players have actually genuinely adopted these practices because there's a push globally, and we see that transition happening.
Yeah, I think it speaks to what Waqas you were saying earlier also, right? So there's so there's a business case on so many levels, right? There's a business case in terms of who's buying from them, but also the business case that Waqas was talking about, just in terms of the energy efficiency, the costs of saving, the saving costs. The costs that you save as a result of going greener, with biomass or renewables of other kinds, because crude oil prices and then generally power prices are so high. And I think one of the other interesting things that comes out from what you're talking about, Saqib, is the same downstream work that you were talking about in your particular case on biomass collection. There's an entire industry that can be developed and supported that could help you do the audits, the third-party audits in terms of the environment. Again, once you have those audits, you become more investable, right? So if you're looking at international financing or international credit for your company, there's a lot of social performance now that comes in, and so you have firms that do social performance, and so if they could be brought to the fore in Pakistan, so there's an entire economy that would actually come around these investments, and I think as an investor, and also I think for when we were talking about regulation, it's an important thing for the regulator to look at. How do you also create these supporting mechanisms
Absolutely.
around, this greening? Because if you need a certification of XYZ, to be able to sell to an international buyer, then that XYZ certification needs to be available in Pakistan. You don't want to have to import that also and pay for it in dollars. So I think that this is a very kind of a compelling point, because it kind of talks about a lot of what we've been talking about. So there's a need. There's a need in terms of just cost saving, but also a need in terms of the markets that they want to sell at. And then there's an entire industry that can be actually developed and augmented around the whole renewables and greening. So that's very, very interesting. Do you have anything to add on the greenwashing bit, or you think Saqib's kind of...
From a business perspective, everything starts from the customer, right? Now, the local customer in Pakistan is not pushing or not asking for environmentally sustainable product yet. But the foreign buyers are. And we see that, right? Where our chemicals are going to many different sectors, and the export manufacturers, the textile manufacturers are. This year was the first year we got a few inquiries from, I think, 3 or 4 manufacturers that what's your greenhouse gas impact. Now that's a start, and we took that as a very positive sign. On the other hand, the local selling that's happening, I mean, the local brands and the local, they don't really care too much about it yet. The MNCs have their own international targets. They're reducing their own Scope 1, 2 emissions. But when it comes to buying, for example, chemicals, they talk about it, but it's not a decision. It's not something that plays a part in the decision making yet. Maybe it'll play a bigger part when the local customer starts asking for a more sustainable solution, right? So it starts with the customer and it ends with the customer. It's all there.
Spoken like a true businessman. Great. Thank you so much, Saqib, and thank you so much, Waqas, for being on the podcast today. I think the business case for investing in green and renewables is extremely visible, given the prices for energy in Pakistan. The feasibilities are looking good. Given that this is a priority sector, there is investment drive, and there are investors that are looking to invest in this sector. Of course, this needs to be more cogent. The private sector and the public sector need to work together. The banks need to pull up their socks and invest more in this priority sector. But it was very, very interesting talking to both of you and getting the lowdown on, what's happening and what needs to happen. So thank you again for joining us for this podcast.